Hello and welcome. You're watching I24 News coming to you live from Tel Aviv. The top stories this hour. Several days of mourning declared in Iran, Syria and Lebanon after Iran's President Raisi and his foreign minister were killed in a helicopter crash. An historical disgrace. Israeli politicians from across the board condemned the International Criminal Court as it says it's seeking arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And angry protests in Tunisia as people demand the government remove migrants who have come there from sub-Saharan Africa in a bid to reach Europe. But first, Iran's supreme leader has appointed the Vice President Mohammad Mokhber as transitional president following the death of President Raisi in a helicopter crash yesterday. The foreign minister was also killed, their bodies retrieved after a 15-hour search in bad weather in the mountains near the border with Azerbaijan. Despite a 5-day mourning period, there were scenes of celebration inside the country. Our senior correspondent Bianca Zanini has more.
We are all here from God and we go back to him. The servant of Imam Reza and the servant of people, Dr. Sayed Ibrahim Raisi, the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, became a martyr in the path of serving the people.
Rescuers struggled for hours overnight through heavy fog, rain and difficult mountainous terrain to reach the crash site of the helicopter carrying Raisi and Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian. On Monday morning, the charred wreckage of the helicopter was found, and the announcement of the president's death was made on national TV.
The hard-working and relentless president of the Iranian people, who did nothing but serve his people on its way to progress, kept his promise and sacrificed his life for the nation.
The first images of the bodies being carried away from the crash were released early Monday. A controversial figure, Raisi was a hardliner, a loyalist of the country's de facto head, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. With a background in the clergy and judiciary, Raisi was known as the Butcher of Tehran for his part in sentencing thousands to death. On the streets of the capital, Tehran, many expressed sadness following the news.
It was really unfortunate news, not only for me, but for many people in the country. After all, he is the elected president of the nation.
But on social media, videos of celebrations and fireworks. Internationally, condolences from leaders in the region began pouring in immediately.
First of all, I would like to extend my condolences to the brotherly Iranian people on the death of the President of the Islamic Republic, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and their accompanying delegation following the accident they had yesterday. We ask God Almighty to forgive them.
With Hamas and Hezbollah among the first to convey their support, saying Raisi was a true protector of the resistance. Russia, China and Turkey, who had sent a rescue team to help the efforts, followed suit, sending condolences, and Lebanon declared 3 days of mourning. Days after criticizing Iranian officials for threatening to develop nuclear weapons and for their lack of cooperation with UN inspectors, the head of the nuclear watchdog IAEA addressed the news.
We are all aware of the tragic news from the weekend. Please join me in observing a minute of silence.
Slower to respond, Western leaders also extended their condolences. Israel did not, but it did say that it was not involved in the accident.
So what does Raisi's death mean for Iran and for the wider region? Well, for more, we're joined by Jason Brodsky, Policy Director of the group United Against Nuclear Iran. Thanks for joining us, Jason. So tell us, does Raisi's death spark a power struggle inside Iran, in particular in regard with who will succeed the elderly Supreme Leader?
It's great to be with you, Laura. On the fundamentals of the Islamic Republic's policies, Raisi's death will not change anything. The Islamic Republic Supreme Leader is the strategic decision maker. The president is an implementer. So that's important, I think, for your viewers to understand. Where this will have an impact, though, is on the politics surrounding succession in the Islamic Republic. The Supreme Leader is 85 years old and is getting older, and therefore Raisi was considered a top contender to replace him, given that Ayatollah Khamenei became Supreme Leader after serving as president. So with Raisi off the scene, he was someone with the most bureaucratic experience of any in the political elite in the Islamic Republic. That opens the contest to other candidates and will encourage the regime to look to candidates who weren't in the first tier, if you will, like Raisi. Mojtaba Khamenei is one such candidate, and there are others like Ali Reza Arafi, Mohsen Komi, and even maybe the Chief Justice of Iran, as many other Chief Justices were considered contenders for supreme leadership before they passed.
So do you foresee any change then to foreign policy and Iran's efforts to dominate the region via its proxies?
No, I don't. First, it's important to note that the IRGC reports to Iran's supreme leader. He is the constitutional commander-in-chief. The IRGC runs Iran's regional foreign policy. The foreign ministry is just a messenger in this regard. So it's important to note that as well. And secondly, I would say that on the nuclear file, these are system-wide decisions that the Supreme Leader oversees. And so that's important for your viewers to understand.
We saw on social media some scenes of celebration, possibly fireworks, of course, always impossible to verify. Do you think that those are credible? Do you think they are widespread? And do you think that this could trigger further anti-regime protests?
I think that there is always the risk of anti-regime protests. I think the Iranian people, the president, just reinforced that the regime is irredeemable and incompetent, and therefore the only answer is the end of the Islamic Republic. And they, as we're seeing with the fireworks overnight, they're hoping that this will hasten that day. And I think that the regime is on borrowed time. And the Iranian people have seen that the regime has no answers for their troubles. They've seen reformist presidents, conservative presidents. Nothing has changed because at the end of the day, the problem is the system and the supreme leader.
And finally, a word on the international reaction. What do you make of the European Union offering its not just condolences, but sincere condolences to Tehran?
I think it was highly embarrassing for the European Union. This is a government in the Islamic Republic that is holding European nationals hostage. It's trying to assassinate European nationals on European soil. I think it's a disgrace. I think silence would have been better for the European Union officials. And I would also say it was a very sad moment to see the ambassador from my country, the deputy UN ambassador, standing for a moment of silence on behalf of the butcher of Tehran at the UN Security Council. Another sad moment. U.S. officials and Western officials need to wake up.
Jason, thank you very much. Jason Brodsky there at the United Against a Nuclear Iran. Well, unsurprisingly, Israeli leaders have not sent their condolences to Tehran, although one unnamed Israeli official told journalists here that it wasn't us. Well, for more on that, we're joined in the studio by Professor Uzi Rabi, Director of the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle East Studies and a Senior Researcher at the Center for Iranian Studies at Tel Aviv University. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Raisi and his foreign minister were, of course, both sworn enemies of Israel. They were both in power when Iran fired 300 missiles at Israel recently. Aside from the Schadenfreude, will anything change for Israel?
Well, Raisi was a staunch, I would say, erstwhile enemy of Israel in the sense of anti-Israeli and anti-Zionist, maybe anti-Jewish phrases that he actually came up with when Israel was mentioned. He said that his mission was to warm up relations with everybody in the world, but except Israel. The thing is that this guy is part and parcel of the Islamic Revolution. If you look at his biography, you would find simultaneous emergence. With the regime, he is an Ayatollah, so he is a cleric. He used to be a civil magistrate and thereafter actually one of the leading figures in the law system in Iran. He executed a lot of people. So basically, he was depicted as the butcher from Tehran. But when it comes to regional strategic issues, he's not the guy actually to deal with. Everything that is being implemented practically day by day in the region East, plus Israel, is the Revolutionary Guards and the Royal Courts, which is the Jerusalem Courts, the unit actually which
the
is responsible, Al-Quds Force. So what is the meaning of him being actually removed from the scene now? The first thing is that this is a hit for the regime. Why? Because Ayatollah Ali Khamenei deliberately actually asked for kind of a president in, I would say, Ibrahim Raisi style. Why? Because he actually represents the hawkish,
a hardliner.
The hardliners in the when it comes to the policymakers in Iran, and when it comes to the let's say people of the revolution. I wouldn't rule out the possibility that somebody actually settled scores with Raisi because he was named and was looked at as kind of an optional would-be supreme leader, and maybe it has to do with this power struggles within the Revolutionary Guards and the Ayatollah circles. But I would say that Raisi was very, very, highly, I would say, very, very cruel and sort of an enemy when it comes to the Iranian society. It was very, very dramatic, fascinating even, to see the dissonance when you have this 5 day of mourning actually being proclaimed by the regime.
You think that those pictures from on social media from inside the country are...
I know it. I've been there in the social media actually platforms. I saw actually how is hated this guy.
Far from praying for him, they were celebrating. And I just want to ask you just briefly, a lot is being said about, Iran spends so much money on drones, so much money on arming its proxies, then it puts its president and foreign minister on a rusty helicopter off into the foggy mountains. I mean, does this signal a level of incompetence?
And 1 out of 3, actually.
Yeah, 1 out of 3.
So I don't know. I mean, basically this is very typical to Iran, to channel the money actually to its adventurous politics in both Central Asia and specifically the Middle East. That helicopter or this thing is pretty questionable, I would say, as to the operation level, as to the stuff that Iran is using these days when it comes to such issues. But listen, even if actually that was done deliberately, even if not, Raisi basically was part and parcel, as I said, the forefront of this Islamic revolution in his biography, in his ideology. So basically, if these are power struggles, it heralds one thing more. Maybe people do think that the numbered days of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei are kind of send a signal for them to wrap up their camp and be well prepared and ready for the day after.
Okay, all right, Uzi Webber for now. Thank you very much. Well, meanwhile, the US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is due to arrive in Egypt following talks with leaders here in Israel and in Saudi Arabia. Sullivan attended a security briefing here and was told by the Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, that the IDF still intends to go into Rafah despite strong opposition from Washington. Israel says almost 1 million civilians have left Rafah in the past 2 weeks. Our Robert Swift has more.
Not for the first time, and likely not for the last, Jake Sullivan is visiting Israel amid the ongoing war in Gaza. The US's National Security Advisor brought with him news from his diplomatic stopover in Saudi Arabia. In meetings with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Sullivan stressed the possibility that Saudi Arabia is prepared to normalize ties with Israel if Jerusalem concedes to the formation of a Palestinian state, something the White House knows Netanyahu's far-right coalition partners will almost certainly never accept.
We will not reward the terrible massacre of October 7th, which 80% of the Palestinians support. We will not allow them to establish a terrorist state from which they will be able to vigorously attack us.
Sullivan also met with Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, where he was briefed on Israeli efforts to displace hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from the southern Gazan city of Rafah as the IDF expands operations there. Concerns over civilian casualties in Rafah have brought the Jerusalem-Washington alliance to a new low point, with Sullivan also conducting meetings with War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz and leader of the opposition Yair Lapid. As Israel's longest war drags on, with no obvious end in sight, it's likely only a matter of time until the next high-level US visit to Jerusalem.
Well, for more on that, we're joined now by Hussein Abdul Hussein, Research Fellow at the FDD, the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Great to see you, Hussein. And first of all, Jake Sullivan seems to have failed, doesn't he, in getting the Israelis to stop the planned operation in Rafah. Can we expect some blowback from the Biden administration?
Well, I think the Biden administration cares more about the optics than what really goes on the ground. And this is primarily because we are currently in the middle of an election cycle and everyone is preparing for the presidential election in November. So if this continues to be a low-intensity war that, like the one that we see now, without having a major air and ground force operation like in the first weeks of the Gaza war, then I wouldn't expect the Biden administration to be pressing Israel to stop any of whatever it's doing now in Rafah.
Now, while Sullivan was here meeting with Israeli leaders, President Biden was giving a speech to students over in the US, and he said that creating a Palestinian state was part of his plan for the region. I mean, is it right for the president to be talking about this while hostages, American hostages among them, are still being held in Gaza?
Well, on paper, it's great, but what we're talking about is that we're talking about a tripartite agreement between three governments, the Israeli, the Saudi, and the Palestinians. And I only see the signature of two governments, Israel and Saudi Arabia. Where's the Palestinian signature on this? Who's talking on behalf of the Palestinians? And when I say on behalf of Palestinians, I mean all of them, the PA and Hamas and Islamic Jihad. So the issue here is that we have parties that are talking as if they're talking to themselves, with the main party missing from this. And I'm not saying here that the problem is that we're not talking to the Palestinians. I'm saying here that there's no one to talk to on the Palestinian side. So we can come up with whatever rosy outcome that we want to see happen between Israel and the Palestinians, but no matter what we say or what plans we come up with, if there's no solid Palestinian partner to stand up and say, okay, you know, what we agree on, I'll be there, I'll sign on it, I don't think anything will happen.
And I mean, all American presidents in recent history have pushed for a two-state solution. It is part of a long-standing US policy. Does the Biden administration have any new ideas?
Well, unfortunately, I think sometimes US presidents tend to use the two-state solution as a lip service to just keep things away from them, especially in times like this when when everyone is preparing for election. This has been the case for a long time. It's enough to just say two-state solution and move on without actually thinking what's on the ground and without thinking whether the two-state solution actually matches the reality that we have on the ground. So how can we impose a two-state solution when you have the strongest Palestinian faction, which is Hamas, that wants to destroy Israel? So it's really nice to say these things. They look great on paper, but in reality, I really don't see anything that's new that requires any diplomatic change or shift on the part of Israel or the US.
And finally, Hussein, a lot of pressure from Washington on Israel, not so much pressure on other allies in the region, Qatar and Egypt, for example, to get a hostage deal, for example.
Well, this has been really problematic, especially when it comes to Qatar. We know that they have strong ties with Hamas. We know that they're still handling Hamas's propaganda, and in Arabic, they're speaking with a Hamas tongue, but in English, they speak a different language. And I think this two-faced diplomacy or policy has not been the best choice for anyone in the region. So I wish to see more pressure from Washington on Doha. And unfortunately, I don't think we've seen any over the past few months.
Hussein Abdul Hussein, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And Uzi Rabi is here with me in the studio, just reacting to what you've just heard. Do you think President Biden was right to talk about a two-state solution? And do you think that there is an unfair amount of pressure on Israel right now?
Definitely. I think that I 100% agree with the lip service thing. You know, you come up with the envelope. This whole thing doesn't correspond with the reality. Second, there is kind of a linkage that cannot be ignored between the continuation of the war and the basically losing in what I would call actually the elections in the US. If I would actually try to have the back of mind of Democrats, the thing is that the more actually this war goes on, the less votes actually we're going to have when it comes to the election. So basically Democrats, while looking on campuses, at the campuses, while understanding that there is kind of a huge fuss in the United States in line with the ongoing of the war, they would like actually this war or to become low intense, as was said, or to be stopped ultimately until basically election comes on or to the fore in the United States. I think that the whole Democratic, I would say, election campaign is at kind of a question mark as long as this war actually goes on. So in my opinion, what the Biden administration is doing is trying to tie up loose ends. Basically, to go talk to the Saudi Arabia, provide them with what they have been dreaming of, actually American backup, security umbrella, as was the case in the 20th century, normalization with Israel. This would be the prize for a Palestinian state. In my opinion, there is kind of a good chance for this normalization to be materialized as long as Israel is coming up with something that would sound or look at sort of an interim solution for the time being with the Palestinians. The problem, as was said, is that Palestinians actually are not there to decide to come up with kind of a very, very solid voice. And basically, as long as Hamas is there, how can we talk about kind of a partition which is acceptable by both sides? Because of that, I think that what Biden administration and the Biden president, actually the president was, I would say, advised to come up with this grand calculus, so to speak, as to put this, you know, kind of a fixed idea. Palestinians said, sounds good, but doesn't correspond with reality.
With the situation on the ground. Okay, for now, thank you, Uzi Rabi. Well, the IDF says the fighting in Gaza will last another 6 months at least, saying that not enough senior Hamas field commanders have been killed, and there is mounting pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to come up with a plan for a post-war Gaza. More in this report.
The war in Gaza continues, with Israel maintaining that fighting in the north of the enclave and expanding military action in the south is necessary. But in the halls of the Israeli parliament, political pressure is growing and divisions are coming to a boil. On Saturday, War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz threatened to resign and issued an ultimatum to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to come up with a post-war plan for Gaza.
The War Cabinet must form a 6-point plan by June 8th. To bring back home our hostages, to eliminate the Hamas regime, and to demarcate the Gaza Strip to ensure Israeli security control.
Gantz, the leader of the National Unity Party, joined the governing coalition and the War Cabinet to help steer the country through the war. He listed 6 demands, including an end to Hamas's rule, a demilitarization of the Strip, and the establishment of an international administration to manage civilian affairs in Gaza. Gantz added that a small extremist minority has taken over the leadership of the Israeli government and was, quote, sailing the country towards the rocks.
If you, Prime Minister, prefer the national to the personal and choose to follow the path of Herzl, Ben-Gurion and Rabin, you will find us partners in the struggle. But if you choose and lead the entire nation into an abyss, we will choose to resign from the government.
Netanyahu immediately dismissed the demand, saying that Gantz should instead pose ultimatums to Hamas, and asking 3 questions. Does Gantz want to see the operation in Rafah through to its end? And if so, why is he threatening to topple the unity government during the IDF operation? Does he oppose Palestinian Authority rule in Gaza even if Mahmoud Abbas is not involved? And would he support a Palestinian state as part of a normalization process with Saudi Arabia? Gantz's office was quick to respond, saying that he would have entered and finished the mission in Rafah months ago, that Palestinians can be part of a post-war leadership in Gaza, and that normalization with Saudi Arabia isn't dependent on a Palestinian state, avoiding a direct answer. Far-right Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir made his opinion about Gantz clear, posting on X just one word: leave. Gantz's statement came days after Defense Minister Yoav Gallant appealed for Netanyahu to present a post-war plan for Gaza. And amid growing anti-government protests demanding new elections.
Government is taking our country to places that I don't want to see my country go to. And I don't think that's where my parents and grandparents that helped build this country wanted to see this country going to.
7 months into the war, and it seems there's no end in sight. And hostilities aren't confined to the Gaza Strip.
Time for a short break. When we come back, there is outcry here after the ICC, the International Criminal Court, announced it was seeking arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant over the war in Gaza. 3 Hamas leaders also wanted by the court. We'll talk more about that after the break. Don't go away.
Israel's story must reach the whole world. The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël.
The state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. Now on Hot.
Welcome back. The chief prosecutor for the International Criminal Court says he's seeking arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, along with 3 Hamas leaders. Israeli politicians from across the board have condemned the decision. More in this report from our Emmanuel Honora.
You have to hear this to believe this.
Fast forward to now, not only does the world hear about the International Criminal Court's contemplation to charge senior Israeli government and military officials, but also sees it.
I can also confirm today that I have reasonable grounds to believe, on the basis of evidence collected and examined by my office, that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant bear criminal responsibility for the following international crimes.
The charges include civilian starvation as a method of warfare, willfully causing great suffering, serious injury to body or health, or cruel treatment, along with willful killing and intentionally directing attacks against civilian populations. That's not all, though. The ICC is also seeking arrest warrants for Hamas leaders.
3 senior leaders of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Daif, and Ismail Haniyeh, bear criminal responsibility for the following international crimes committed on the territory of Israel and the State of Palestine from at least the 7th of October 2023.
The charges against Hamas vary between crimes against humanity and war crimes. Israeli rivals and typical critics of the Prime Minister also didn't mince words.
The State of Israel waged one of the just wars after the massacre perpetrated by Hamas terrorists against Israel's citizens. The State of Israel fights in the most moral way in history, while complying with international law, and the State of Israel has an independent and robust judicial system. Drawing parallels between the leaders of a country which came out to defend its citizens and bloodthirsty terrorists is a moral blindness and damages its obligation and its ability to defend its citizens.
It's a disaster. It's a political disaster. It's a moral disaster. It cannot be that they just issue arrest warrants against Netanyahu, Yahya Sinwar, Haniyeh, and Mohammed Daif after they slaughtered us and our children on October 7th. There is no such comparison. We won't accept it, and we can't accept it. It's unforgivable.
A panel of judges is set to consider ICC prosecutor Karim Khan's application for arrest warrants. Meanwhile, Israel isn't a member of the ICC, but that's where it starts to get tricky, since the ICC does claim to have jurisdiction over the Palestinian territories after Palestinian leaders agreed to be formally bound by the ICC in 2015. The ICC's request comes at a particularly sensitive time for Netanyahu amid increasing international isolation and internal political pressure from his own ministers over the operation in Gaza.
Well, Professor Uzi Rabi from Tel Aviv University is with me in the studio. And of course, Israel is not a signatory to the ICC, nor is the United States. What would be the implications if those arrest warrants are indeed issued?
Well, first of all, it is, in my opinion, outrageous, as an Israeli to sound that voice of this prosecutor coming up with a list where Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister, and Yoav Gallant are being equated with people like Sinwar, Haniyeh, and Mohammed Daif. I mean, this is unbelievable. This cannot be accepted. I think that Israel should do whatever it can, actually, in order to mobilize some of the states that are being considered actually friends to not only ignore this fact, which means actually to not implement it when it comes to their domain, but also influence some other states actually to skip that out and not let this thing actually happen.
Well, there has been some reaction already from Europe. The British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's office has said that the warrants are not helpful. Some other Europeans have also condemned the decision by the ICC. Of course, European countries are signatories of the ICC.
Yeah, I mean, I am very glad to hear that, and I think that Israel should diplomatically actually come up with kind of an intensive campaign as to make sure that everybody in the free world would look at the UN as kind of a so biased organ that something should be done with that. And I already heard some member of the US Congress coming up with
Richie Torres,
saying that if that is the issue, they would even go as far as to sanction or to just come up with some punishing acts toward the prosecutor and the ICC itself.
Yeah, that's Congressman Richie Torres,
so
and also
it is,
Senator Liz Graham.
Yeah, what is being called into question is not for the first time, actually, what all these, I would say, international bodies do contribute to the, get kind of a lull or kind of a release, something that would something that would actually help out to solve our problems in the international arena.
Well, we were just talking about the UN Security Council observing a minute's silence for Ibrahim Raisi.
Ibrahim Raisi. You know, these guys actually haven't heard about Iranian women, haven't heard about human rights in Iran. How low can you get? This is exactly what we got here. But never mind. I mean, Israel should anyway come up with a diplomatic campaign, do whatever it can, and be very, very careful as not actually to fall into the trap that those guys are coming up with. Once again, this is outrageous. We do not accept it.
And just to put the prosecutor, Khan, he was here in Israel shortly after October 7th, and he toured the kibbutzim. He saw for himself what had happened there. Was Israel right to invite him, do you think, now looking back?
I think that, this is kind of a tragedy that was written in advance. Actually, we knew basically what the end game is. I had no even the slightest chance that the results would be different. I am not surprised, but I think that the fact that this guy, after having been here, after seeing the atrocities, after being fed with false data and figures coming for Hamas, and we just heard that the number that were given by actually the Palestinian health ministry and some other official forces, so to speak, when it comes to Gaza, this was basically far from truth. And I think that in spite of that, the prosecutor and the team he has actually had been fed by false figures, and they act as if those figures actually should be reckoned with as an ultimate truth. And basically, this is also a wake-up call, not only for Israel, for the free world. Something should be changed when it comes to those international bodies.
There are some political developments. We're going to go to Jerusalem now, and the Knesset has just struck down 3 no-confidence motions in Netanyahu's government. At the same time, thousands of people have come out onto the streets to protest against the government. Let's go to Jerusalem. Our correspondent Balir Sladin is there. Balir, what's happening?
Yes, moments ago the protest here finished, and some of the people that were protesting here started to march to Gaza Street, which is where the Prime Minister's residence is. Most of them actually came from there and did the demonstration here in front of the Knesset, where we're standing right now. There were thousands of people, I have to say, right here in front of the Knesset today. We've heard lots of speeches against the government. I should mention that this is not a protest or for the families of the hostages, although some of them, of course, were here, but rather protest against the government, so speech against Netanyahu. And this is coming, especially right now, days after the announcement from both Gallant, the defense minister, and also the member of the cabinet, Benny Gantz. Both of them said that there are some political interests that are entering the war cabinet, and they are demanding Netanyahu to take action, especially in terms of post-war Gaza. So the protesters here actually quoted both Gallant and Gantz, saying that Netanyahu is now taking decisions based on what is best for him politically or personally. They are also saying that, of course, all what he cares about is actually preserving his coalition and not actually bringing back the hostages or winning this war. So they are demanding that release of the hostages would be the first priority for this war, even if that means actually to end the war with Hamas in Gaza. So even one of the Tionut Datit party, so the religious Zionist, came, Tzvika Sukkot, came to here, and we've heard lots of confrontation between him and lots of other protesters calling him out and saying that he has blood on his hands. So it's obvious the division is back again in the streets of Israel in the background of this war. So what we're witnessing today is another episode of the anti-government protests, even in the day that the ICC or International Criminal Court is actually issuing a warrant against or wants to issue a warrant against Netanyahu and other members of the cabinet.
Balir, thank you very much. Balir Sladin there in Jerusalem. Now, at least 6 pro-Iran fighters were reportedly killed in an Israeli airstrike in Syria this morning. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says that the strikes happened close to the Lebanese border. This as sirens have been blaring throughout the day in Israel's northern communities, most of them largely evacuated, tens of thousands still unable to return home. Let's go to the north. Our correspondent Zach Andrus joins us now. Zach, what's the latest?
Yeah, like you mentioned, Hezbollah has announced additional deaths, bringing the now 5 that they've added to the total up to 309 that have been killed since the start of this conflict here. Hezbollah claiming responsibility for 12 attacks at this point in the day. That is up from yesterday. We've also seen apparent light damage. I should retract. Light, extensive damage, really, to the home in Metula, with the homeowner telling local media here in the north that, quote, "I was lucky. Hezbollah saw me enter my house but did not notice that I left. Every few days I come home to wash my clothes, drink an espresso, and go out. That time they got me. We're like ducks. I'm the 6th generation here. I can't be moved from my land." In response, the IDF today has been striking several positions in southern Lebanon, including the Al-Mawiyah area near the border. It is, from what Lebanese channels are reporting, extensive airstrikes that have been taking place once again throughout the day. And as we've discussed, these ebb and flow periods that take place here on this northern border, this has been a sustained high pitch over the last week and a half, where the attacks have been consistently hovering about 10 or more a day. And the targeted areas have been consistently military sites on the Israeli side. On the Lebanese side, consistently these villages that are very close to the border. And we continue to see Lebanese channels report that the damage is hitting homes and buildings. They keep claiming that these are civilian homes, civilian buildings. The IDF on the other side saying and releasing video evidence that Hezbollah has been moving into these homes and buildings that have not been hit at this point in the war, taking them over. You'll have to remember that these areas of southern Lebanon are largely evacuated as well, evacuated on people's own accord. Many of the people that live near these areas are fleeing, escaping from the conflict, escaping from the airstrikes, whereas here in northern Israel, this is an official evacuation notice that is hosted by the government. Again, another intense day here. 12 attacks Hezbollah has claimed responsibility for.
Zach, thank you very much. Zach Andrus there in the north of Israel. Well, to talk about all of the developments, David Daoud is a Hezbollah and Lebanon Senior Fellow at the FDD. Thanks for being with us, David. First of all, 3 days of mourning declared in Lebanon for the death of Iran's President Raisi. What does that tell us?
It tells us that Hezbollah is mourning for the loss of the head of state of its chief ally, of its patron. This is this is par for the course for the relationship between Hezbollah and Iran.
And how does the death of Raisi affect Hezbollah, the Lebanese proxy?
Beyond the emotional, it doesn't. We need to understand that decision-making, as far as Iran is concerned, does not happen with the president, at the level of the president, or of the foreign minister, who was also killed in the helicopter accident. The tone is set primarily by Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. This is the person who sets top Iranian policy, sets the country's foreign posture. You might have a difference in kind of the language, whether Iran takes a more conciliatory approach for pragmatic reasons, or a sharper tone when it comes to its adversaries. But the end goal is the same. It's the exportation of the revolution. And like I said, this outlook is set by the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and it's primarily executed by the IRGC and the Quds Force. The head of state does not make this policy.
And Hezbollah is losing fighters almost daily, but it's also managed to, as we just heard, turn the north of Israel into a war zone for several months, with tens of thousands of people unable to return home. I mean, is this a sort of a victory for Hezbollah?
It depends on how this round of fighting ends. Hezbollah, the way they define victory differs significantly from your or mine, our understanding of a classical victory, meaning two forces clash and one inflicts a greater degree of damage on the other. If we look at the damage that's been happening, yes, there have been an estimated 80,000, although I've seen more recent estimates of 60,000 Israelis evacuated from the north. There's been extensive damage to the northern Israeli communities, border outposts, military border outposts. There have been losses on the Israeli side. But if you look at the flip side, Hezbollah is suffering more. As your reporter just noted, they've lost 309 fighters, which far exceeds the number of Israeli casualties. The damage to the south, particularly to the infrastructure of the south, is much larger than on the Israeli side. And 90,000 Lebanese have been evacuated. And let's remember that, yes, the evacuation of Israeli civilians from the north is taking a toll on Israel's budget and the government. But Israel can handle a lot more than Lebanon can. And there are 90,000 Lebanese right now who have been displaced, and they don't have the same safety net. So as Naim Qasim, the Deputy Secretary General, said in a recent interview, they weren't expecting this war to last this long. They were hoping for something quick and short. And I think this is bleeding them, but they can't climb down from the tree, as it were.
And David, the French have come up with a plan that didn't go anywhere. The Americans had a plan that didn't go anywhere. Have all diplomatic avenues to try and end this conflict been exhausted?
It depends on what you mean by exhausted. International law requires a country, before it exercises its right of self-defense, to allow reasonable, peaceful measures to take effect. I don't know if these measures that have been put into place, there's a reasonable expectation that they would succeed, given that they all depend upon Lebanon to enforce and maintain the enforcement of Resolution 1701. This is something Lebanon cannot do. So whatever deal is struck, the French paper or something else, the expectation that it will solve the Hezbollah problem in any permanent sense is fantastical, if you ask me.
David Dowd, great to talk to you as always. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Izzy Rabi's with me in the studio. And it's heartbreaking, isn't it, the situation in the north, when we hear about people in Metula, 6 generations, can't go to their homes, living as refugees in their own country.
Heartbreaking. And if I may, actually, this tit-for-tat thing that is being actually handled between Israel and Hezbollah is something that corresponds with Hezbollah agenda, because in their definition, this is definitely sort of a victory. When it comes to Israel, this is a great loss. And Israel now is being situated in kind of a limbo, where Israel has to come up with a breakthrough, which has to be of military nature. Maybe not an overall war, but to count on actually those attempts of let us say, international sort of, attempts at reaching kind of an agreement? Haven't we got the 1701? Haven't we understood that there is no guarantee whatsoever to any agreement with such groups like Hamas and Hezbollah? We have actually to conclude at this moment that what we are getting in the north is not less a real blow to the Zionist ethos. Israel must actually go back to its senses and create kind of a retaliation, or at least kind of a limited attack, by which to make sure of two things. First of all, northerners are going to get back to their homes. Radwan forces cannot be there because this would actually signal for kind of an optional 7th of October scenario in the north. When it comes to the missiles, there is no geography here. We know that. But basically this would be actually stage one. In the medium or long term, a war is unavoidable with Hezbollah, because with that kind of a neighbor, Israel cannot actually foster a healthy future for itself.
Uzi Rabi, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
Now to other news, and hundreds of Tunisians have been marching in the coastal town of Djemediana to demand the removal of sub-Saharan migrants. People from places like Mali and Burkina Faso are trying to cross Tunisia to reach Europe via the Mediterranean. But as part of a deal reached with the EU, Tunisia has stepped up its sea patrols and many migrants are trapped there. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Sarah Yerkes, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Thank you for joining us. And this isn't the first time we've seen these kinds of anti-migrant protests in Tunisia, is it? Why do the people not want them there?
The migrant challenge has been growing in Tunisia over the past several years, and for now, the economy is really just in terrible straits. So Tunisians themselves can't find food on the shelves, they can't find jobs, and the president has stoked all sorts of rhetoric blaming this on the migrants. He's issued all sorts of statements that are racist, that are very much anti-migrant. So people who support the president have bought into this, and they are now demanding that the migrants leave, and they are supporting Said's actions, the president, to remove the migrants himself and to make deals with African countries to return them, in some cases very much against international law.
Might these protests force President Said to tear up that deal with the EU?
You know, he hasn't actually followed much of what he was supposed to do in that deal anyway. He has been known since he's been president, since 2019, for basically ignoring what anyone else asks him to do. So the EU, I think, is very desperate. They see boats and boats of people, including Tunisians. We see more and more Tunisians also trying to get on boats and get to Italy, but more and more, Tunisians and sub-Saharan African migrants trying to get to Italy. So the EU is desperate. They've inked a deal with Said, I think, knowing full well that he's not likely going to follow most of it. So I don't know that he would actually tear it up physically, but I think it's likely he'll ignore it, which he has frankly been doing most of the time anyway.
And people are still managing to make this very dangerous sea crossing, aren't they? We've got, in the latest reports, some 25 people are missing after their boat sank or got into trouble off the coast. Can we expect this to get worse over the summer? It's been many years now where nobody seems to have come up with a plan to stop this from happening.
Absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely heartbreaking when you look at the numbers. Every day almost there's a news story about a boat capsizing, about people, including children, pregnant women, people who are just desperate to get a better life and a better future for themselves, getting on these boats and either not making it or being apprehended by the Tunisians, by the Europeans. I think we are going to continue to see these numbers grow as Tunisia is failing to address its own economic problems, causing more and more both Tunisians and sub-Saharan African migrants to want to leave.
Sarah Yerkes, thank you very much. Great to talk to you.
Thank you.
And we end here in Israel this hour. Shani Luke, one of the best-known victims of the October 7th attacks, has been finally laid to rest here in Israel. Over the weekend, the IDF informed her family that her body had been retrieved, along with the bodies of two other hostages, Itzhak Gelerenter and Amit Buskila, and also Ron Benjamin. They were recovered in a joint IDF and Shin Bet operation in Gaza. More in this report.
In Sregim, Israel, the home of Shani Luke's parents stands as a place of deep mourning. The cheerful 23-year-old tattoo artist was murdered during the brutal Hamas attack on October 7th. Her parents, Ricarda and Nissim, have faced the heartbreaking uncertainty of not knowing where her body was.
We got all the answers and we closed this loop. And we are happy, that now she will have her own place next to us. And we can go there whenever we want. And she can rest.
Shani was at the Supernova Music Festival near Re'im, where Hamas massacred over 360 partygoers. Videos of her smiling and dancing surfaced after the attack. Shani's father finds some solace in knowing that she was doing what she loved before she died, dancing and enjoying life.
She loved so much life and she loved so much freedom. And she never thought that there is evil in the world because she was a free spirit. And, and she saw it only for a couple of seconds. She didn't even understand what happened. And then she died. For us, it's a point of relief, actually.
Initially, there was hope that Shani might have survived, but forensic evidence confirmed her death. Shani's tragic end became widely known when a video emerged showing Hamas militants parading her mangled body in the back of a pickup truck through Gaza.
We can tell you from our own experience, and we lost our daughter in this massacre that happened here, and nobody should live through this, and no civilian should die in this way. There is no resistance that can justify what happened here.
Israel must do everything that is necessary to bring them home. Everything, because there are still families that are waiting and longing for their kids and children and beautiful girls and really, and they're waiting and they're praying, and the whole country is praying for that.
For Ricarda and Nissim, having their daughter's body back allows them a final goodbye.
And that brings us to the end of tonight's programme. Thanks for watching. Stay with us on I24 News.
Tel Aviv is ranked the happiest city in the world and the best place to own a home. For 3 generations, the Ben Shalom family has built boutique apartment buildings in the most desirable locations. From restoration in historical locales to homes along Park HaYarkon, Ben Shalom is a one-stop shop from start to finish and friends for life.
This is Breaking News Edition. I'm Benita Levine. A dramatic move by the International Criminal Court prosecutor on this day, requesting arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and 3 Hamas leaders over alleged war crimes: Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Deif, and Ismail Haniyeh. ICC prosecutor Karim Khan saying in a statement on Monday that after over 7 months of war in Gaza, he had reasonable grounds to believe that the 5 men bear criminal responsibility for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. The war he's talking about, of course, starting on the 7th of October with the Hamas terror onslaught and mass abduction in southern Israel. Israeli leaders slamming the surprise move by the ICC. More in this report.
You have to hear this to believe this.
Fast forward to now, not only does the world hear about the International Criminal Court's contemplation to charge senior Israeli government and military officials, but also sees it.
I can also confirm today that I have reasonable grounds to believe, on the basis of evidence collected and examined by my office, that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant bear criminal responsibility for the following international crimes.
The charges include civilian starvation as a method of warfare, willfully causing great suffering, serious injury to body or health, or cruel treatment, along with willful killing and intentionally directing attacks against civilian populations. That's not all, though. The ICC is also seeking arrest warrants for Hamas leaders.
3 senior leaders of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Deif, and Ismail Haniyeh, bear criminal responsibility for the following international crimes committed on the territory of Israel and the State of Palestine from at least the 7th of October 2023.
The charges against Hamas vary between crimes against humanity and war crimes. Israeli rivals and typical critics of the Prime Minister also didn't mince words.
The State of Israel waged one of the just wars after the massacre perpetrated by Hamas terrorists against Israel's citizens. The State of Israel fights in the most moral way in history, while complying with international law, and the State of Israel has an independent and robust judicial system. Drawing parallels between the leaders of a country which came out to defend its citizens and bloodthirsty terrorists is a moral blindness and damages its obligation and its ability to defend its citizens.
It's a disaster. It's a political disaster. It's a moral disaster. It cannot be that they just issue arrest warrants against Netanyahu, Yahya Sinwar, Haniyeh, and Mohammed Deif after they slaughtered us and our children on October 7th. There is no such comparison. We won't accept it, and we can't accept it. It's unforgivable.
A panel of judges is set to consider ICC prosecutor Karim Khan's application for arrest warrants. Meanwhile, Israel isn't a member of the ICC, but that's where it starts to get tricky, since the ICC does claim to have jurisdiction over the Palestinian territories after Palestinian leaders agreed to be formally bound by the ICC in 2015. The ICC's request comes at a particularly sensitive time for Netanyahu amid increasing international isolation and internal political pressure from his own ministers over the operation in Gaza.
So for more reaction to this surprise development, we welcome Professor Eugene Kontorovich, Director at International Law Department at the Kohelet Policy Forum and Professor of Constitutional and International Law at George Mason University. He joins us live from Jerusalem. Professor, thank you for your time. So equating Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant with the likes of Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Deif, Ismail Haniyeh, it seems preposterous, quite frankly. Israel is defending itself and responding to a terror onslaught. The Hamas terror group carried out that said onslaught and is vowing to keep doing so again and again. Your response to this move?
The ICC has given Hamas its biggest victory in the war so far and rewarded Hamas's tactics. The ICC, people should know, is not really some kind of world court. In its more than 20 years of existence, it's only convicted 4 people of the atrocity crimes that it was created to prosecute. It's been plagued with problems, and it has never successfully prosecuted a leader of an incumbent government. Because it has been criticized for targeting African states, which were the ones who joined the ICC, now it's seeking to appeal to a broader audience and to justify its existence to its donors by going to the lowest common denominator, which is, of course, demonization of Jews. Israel has fought perhaps the most meticulous and careful war ever, and finds itself being prosecuted for starvation, even in the absence of any indication that anyone has actually starved. And even when we know that Hamas has been robbing humanitarian aid from the Gazan people. It's an exercise in moral equivalence and a modern blood libel.
And obviously also a major setback here for Israel, as you say, a victory as such for Hamas. Questions about what this means for the ceasefire deal, for the hostage deal. Talk to us a bit, though, to start about the jurisdiction issue. The prosecutor, Karim Khan, announcing these applications for these arrest warrants in the context of what is being called the situation in the state of Palestine. There is no state of Palestine. How does the ICC have jurisdiction here? It's all seeming a little absurd.
Israel is the only non-member of the ICC being investigated on behalf of a member that is not a state. That is to say, the ICC can only be joined by countries. The ICC doesn't automatically have jurisdiction over a country. It has to agree to participate. And so what the Palestinian Authority very cleverly did was it applied to the ICC, which basically acts today as an organ of the United Nations. And they say, oh, the United Nations says that Palestine is a state, so we can take them as a member. And they use that to then claim jurisdiction over anything Israel does in the West Bank or Gaza, despite the fact that Palestine is not a member state of the United Nations and does not meet the international criteria for statehood. There is no other situation like this in the world. They haven't recognized Western Sahara. They haven't recognized Kosovo. So this is one of the ways in which we see the ICC has made unique, unprecedented decisions to take this investigation over Israel.
Unprecedented indeed. But at this point, Professor, we're talking about applications for arrest warrants. If they are issued, what does it mean practically for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant? We know last year Vladimir Putin cancelled plans when he was going to go to BRICS. The summit was taking place in South Africa, and Pretoria would have been obligated as such to arrest the Russian president. There are far more far-reaching implications as well. Talk to us about what could unfold.
The ICC is not going to prosecute Benjamin Netanyahu, and it's not going to prosecute Sinwar. Sinwar is not going to agree, and if anyone ever prosecutes him, it will be Israel. And of course, the leaders of Israel are not going to agree. There's not going to be a prosecution here. The point of this is the demonization. Right? The real effect is going to be a talking point for radical activists against Israel, campus boycotters, campus protesters, to say Israel is charged with war crimes. And too few people will understand that the ICC is not a real court. The ICC lacks legitimacy. The ICC lacks any authority. And the ICC is not acting in any kind of lawful way. Too few will understand that. And it's not about Benjamin Netanyahu. It's about the talking point. Israel is charged with war crimes. And in fact, the actions that are behind these allegations are not actions of Netanyahu or Gallant in particular. They're the actions of the entire Israeli army with the broad support of the Israeli public. Gantz was also involved in these things. It's interesting that he was not part of the indictment. Essentially, they're saying, Israel, you defended yourself against Hamas too much.
Not a good look at all nonetheless, and the timing is indeed curious. Professor Eugene Kontorovich, live from Jerusalem, thank you so much for being with us on I-24 News.
Thank you.
And now for more, we welcome to studio Danny Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the US, the former Israeli deputy foreign minister and chairman of Silver Road Capital. Yaakov Lapin, military and strategic affairs analyst at the Miriam Institute, the Jewish News Syndicate and the Alma Center, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Ambassador, I'm going to start with you. It's being described as outrageous, ludicrous, absurd, equating Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant with these terror leaders from Hamas. We heard there Professor Eugene Kontorovich talking about the demonization of Israel. Your thoughts of the impact, your thoughts about the timing?
Yeah, no, this is, well, the timing is curious, but also we see that this is the first time a democratically elected leader has been charged. So far, we've had despots, whether it's Ali Bashir from Sudan or Milosevic from Serbia and the like. So this is something which is totally unacceptable. And we also, I think, should draw to the attention to that this prosecutor, Mr. Khan, was basing most of his charges on evidence that was gathered by the man he appointed from Ramallah, a Danish person, Andersen, who is married to a Palestinian. He is the guy who submitted all the evidence, or the supposed evidence, and that really makes a mockery out of justice, makes a mockery out of the facts, and just the moral equivalency with the Hamas leaders is just outrageous. I would say also that a political I would say response is also very important, and to that effect we've heard an announcement by President Biden. He calls it outrageous. So I think, and the professor was right, it's not going to have any legal effects, not political effects here in Israel. Israel will continue the war as we need to do, but the only thing here is an ongoing PR war against Israel, which was started by the Palestinians about 20 years ago. And this is another weapon that they can use in campuses, that they can use in media. And this is the main significance of this outrageous decision.
From a security perspective, Yaakov, what does a move like this mean for the war strategy for Israel right now?
Probably very little. In fact, probably nothing, because the IDF is going to continue to fulfill its directives, which it receives from the War Cabinet, and the War Cabinet is going to continue to instruct it to continue its activities in northern, central, and southern Gaza. The IDF's illegal team has been closely accompanying this war. Every single operation is closely accompanied. It's examined to make sure that the principles of international war are closely adhered to, distinguishing between civilians and combatants, proportionality. The Kogat here in Israel has been working very hard to get trucks into the Gaza Strip. Of course, we know that Hamas has been seizing those trucks, and that has been a major complicating factor. And this ties into a separate but slightly related debate about whether Israel should set up some kind of military administration or not to help take charge of that aid and help make sure that it gets to the right place. But in any case, this is not going to affect military operations. It will be part of the non-military battlefield, the lawfare arena, as we call it. This is all about delegitimizing Israel. It's about serving Hamas's war goal, which is aimed at isolating Israel in order to pressure it to stop the war so that it can survive. This is what's essentially happening here. And, this is a serious development from that perspective, from the legitimacy perspective. And I think Israel very much needs the help of the United States to deal with this. This is too much for a small country like Israel to deal with on its own.
To that point, Ariel, the US has weighed in just a short while ago.
Yes, so after a statement from Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the White House also issuing a statement in the name of President Biden, saying, quote, the ICC prosecutor's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders is outrageous. And let me be clear, whatever this prosecutor might imply, there is no equivalence, none, between Israel and Hamas. We will always stand with Israel against threats to its security. And I think, building off what my two colleagues here have been mentioning, Karim Khan, the prosecutor, visited Israel in December at the request of the families of the hostages and the victims. And in his visit, he said that some of the crimes that were committed on October 7th were part of the reason that the ICC was established. He also went on to talk about the issue of the legitimacy of the warfare, acknowledging the complexity of the warfare in densely populated areas, and that, quote, this is Karim Khan back in December after visiting Israel, saying, quote, Israel has a robust system intended to ensure compliance with international humanitarian law, and regarding allegations of crimes by Israel, these should be subject to a timely, independent examination and investigation. Regarding the aid, acknowledging that Hamas is not letting all the aid go through, and so this really feels like a blindsight from the part of the prosecutor, really turning back 180 degrees from these statements he issued just a few months ago when he visited Israel on the ground.
By the way, also worth noting, he did in past years represent Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the son of the Libyan dictator. It's very interesting that now he's going to be preaching and punishing about war crimes.
And again, certainly questions are going to be raised around the timing of this announcement, because there was supposed to be a visit in the coming days as well from a team from the ICC. So certainly much to unpack on that front. Gentlemen, stay with us. There's much more to discuss, because 5 days of mourning have been declared in Iran following that fatal plane crash on Sunday afternoon, or rather helicopter crash, in which President Ibrahim Raisi, Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdullahian and other senior officials were killed. The chopper hitting a mountain in bad weather conditions in East Azerbaijan province on Sunday afternoon, local time. The supreme leader today describing the 63-year-old president as a noble and selfless servant to his country, calling the crash an unfortunate incident. The helicopter was heading back from a ceremony at the opening of a dam in Azerbaijan when it crashed on the border between the two countries. U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer saying he's been briefed by the U.S. Intelligence Committee, and at this point there is no evidence of foul play. Iran has a long history of aviation crashes, some of which have killed top officials. The president will be buried on Thursday. More in this report.
We are all here from God, and we go back to him. The servant of Imam Reza and the servant of people, Dr. Syed Ibrahim Raisi, the President of the Islamic Republic of Iran, became a martyr in the path of serving the people.
Rescuers struggled for hours overnight through heavy fog, rain and difficult mountainous terrain to reach the crash site of the helicopter carrying Raisi and Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian. On Monday morning, the charred wreckage of the helicopter was found, and the announcement of the president's death was made on national TV.
The hard-working and relentless president of the Iranian people, who did nothing but serve his people on its way to progress, kept his promise and sacrificed his life for the nation.
The first images of the bodies being carried away from the crash were released early Monday. A controversial figure, Raisi was a hardliner, a loyalist of the country's de facto head, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. With a background in the clergy and judiciary, Raisi was known as the Butcher of Tehran for his part in sentencing thousands to death. On the streets of the capital, Tehran, many expressed sadness following the news.
It was really unfortunate news, not only for me, but for many people in the country. After all, he is the elected president of the nation.
But on social media, videos of celebrations and fireworks. Internationally, condolences from leaders in the region began pouring in immediately.
First of all, I would like to extend my condolences to the brotherly Iranian people on the death of the President of the Islamic Republic, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and their accompanying delegation following the accident they had yesterday. We ask God Almighty to forgive them.
With Hamas and Hezbollah among the first to convey their support, saying Raisi was a true protector of the resistance. Russia, China, and Turkey, who had sent a rescue team to help the efforts, followed suit, sending condolences, and Lebanon declared 3 days of mourning. days after criticizing Iranian officials for threatening to develop nuclear weapons and for their lack of cooperation with UN inspectors, the head of the nuclear watchdog IAEA addressed the news.
We are all aware of the tragic news from the weekend. Please join me in observing a minute of silence.
Slower to respond, Western leaders also extended their condolences. Israel did not, but it did say that it was not involved in the accident.
Meanwhile, still with the story, Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi's death is likely to trigger an internal power struggle in the Islamic Republic, but the supreme leader and the Revolutionary Guard Corps both want a weak, compliant successor who will continue the regime's nuclear and regional proxies strategy. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran looks at who will replace Raisi and how, if at all, his death will affect the regime. Let's take a look.
While unexpected and surprising, the death of Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi in a helicopter crash on Sunday will not leave the country bereft of leadership. At least that's the message from Iran's first vice president, Mohammad Mokhber, as he led Monday's cabinet meeting beside the empty seat of Raisi.
The country will continue moving forward under this leadership. Everyone should continue on with their roles despite this incident. In no way will this tragic incident interfere with the government and running of our country.
68-year-old Mokhber was confirmed interim head of the country's executive branch by Iran's supreme leader. Seen as close to Khamenei, Mokhber has held prominent positions in the Islamic Republic, despite largely being in the shadows. He will serve as caretaker president for 50 days until new mandatory presidential elections take place in Iran.
People must be assured that there will be no disruption in the work of the country. Officials have been busy with their work very strongly since hearing the news of the incident, and the affairs of the country, are proceeding regularly.
Raisi was seen as the natural successor to Khamenei, but the president in Iran is considered the formal figure responsible for simply implementing the decisions of the supreme leader. In fact, some believe it's the death of Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian, a key figure in Iran's proxy structure alongside the president, that's a more substantial blow to the regime. He has been replaced by veteran nuclear negotiator Ali Bagheri, a harsh critic of the West. And so, while not likely to bring upon a sudden shift in policy or threaten the survival of the Islamic Republic, Raisi's death will likely intensify the internal power struggle in Iran, a war of succession as the supreme leader's authority remains largely unaffected.
So for more, Yaakov Lapin, the butcher of Tehran, killed in this helicopter crash, plus the Iranian foreign minister, plus others. What do you see this meaning for the Islamic Republic and its policy when it comes specifically to the West and Israel?
I think it's a blow. I think it's a blow to Ayatollah Khamenei because it seems like he was counting on Raisi as the next in line to the throne, possibly between him and Khamenei's son. There were a lot of reports saying that he was really grooming Raisi to succeed him. The foreign minister was a very important figure, very close ties to the IRGC, to the Quds Force, often traveled the region and was implementing this Iranian vision of coordinating the various arenas and proxies that the Iranians were in control of, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shiite militias in Iraq and in Syria. He was passing on messages and essentially providing diplomatic cover for Iran's cross-border terrorist activities and military activities. So I think this is a blow, but I think, the real question is, will the Iranian regime enable itself to recover from this blow and not to be basically affected by internal instability? Of course, we in Israel can very much hope for that instability. It would serve our interests. It's a good thing, as far as I'm concerned, for instability to rock this regime, which is dedicated to Israel's destruction, which spreads the Shiite jihad throughout the region. And so I personally can only hope that it does cause instability, but we'll have to wait and see.
How do you see it unfolding, Ambassador?
Well, certainly there's going to be some turbulence inside the political echelons. I would say that there is some suspicion. I wouldn't want to say by high-level Iranian officials, but just as was mentioned here, whether he was groomed to be the next supreme leader or not, it's a very questionable issue, because Khamenei preferred his son, who lacks the qualifications that Raisi has. So of course, all kinds of conspiracies, Middle East is a rift with conspiracy issues. So they think maybe looking for if the supreme leader has an alibi or not. But in any case, I think it's mostly going to be an effect internally. There is no surprise that the first thing that this regime did after the hearing of the crash was to actually shore up their security around Tehran and other places, because they do feel like there may be some people who will exploit it. And we have to remember, this regime is not very popular in Iran. No more than 20% support it.
Stay with us. We're going to discuss that in more detail after a very short break. Stay with us. Our coverage continues. Back in a bit.
Dreamt of owning your own home in Israel? Welcome to Nadlan, where we explore Israel's most stunning real estate.
From vibrant Tel Aviv to historic Jerusalem, our experts will guide you through the market and answer every one of your questions.
So tune into Nadlan to find the perfect property and to make your dream a reality.
Nadlan, your home in Israel.
Only on I-24 News.
Welcome back. Our coverage continues. Protesters have taken a stand in Jerusalem, calling on the Israeli government to do everything in its power to secure the release of hostages in captivity for the past 227 days. The Knesset convening for its summer session, and families of 128 hostages want answers. Still no clarity from Hamas as to how many of the hostages are alive. Organizers of the protest saying they have had enough. So we now go live to correspondent Balir Sladin. He joins us from outside the Israeli parliament in Jerusalem. And Balir, organizers of this protest wanted answers about a hostage deal. They also want to know about evacuees from the north and the south of the country. Talk to us about what protest leaders have been saying. What can you share?
Yes, well, the protest here ended about an hour ago, and some of the protesters are actually marching toward the Prime Minister's residence, where they are confronted with some of the policemen here in Jerusalem, and some confrontation actually occurred between the two sides. This is not the first time, of course, and not even the first time today, because today's morning also 12 people were arrested. Some of them were trying to block the street, according to the police. So we're saying that the protest is intensifying against the government, and this was the theme today. We're talking, of course, about protesters that demand a hostage deal, demand some other, of course, factors that actually connected to the war. But basically, we're talking about the organizations that have been protesting even before the 7th of October against the government, and they were here today, and we've heard the speeches on the stage calling for an early election, saying that Netanyahu is the sole person who's responsible for what happened on the 7th of October, and also saying that he is blocking or actually sabotaging reaching a deal with Hamas to release the hostages. So lots of accusations against Netanyahu, and this is coming especially right now, days after what we've heard from both Gallant, the defense minister, and also the member of the cabinet, Benny Gantz. Both of them accused Netanyahu either directly or indirectly of being or having some political interests or political, that he actually prefers his political, his political position, and not actually what is best for the country. That's something that was one of the major things that we've heard from the protesters here. They are accusing Netanyahu of actually taking decisions according to what's best for him politically or personally, and they're saying that he is actually a captive for the right-wing hardliners in this government, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. So lots of accusation against Netanyahu. We're seeing this internal pressure in Israel against Netanyahu and against the war cabinet in general. That is coming especially in this day, where we're seeing lots of external pressure also against this government coming from the ICC and other international organizations. So the situation, of course, is very hard here for the government, especially for Netanyahu, that is facing right now a deadline from Benny Gantz until the 8th of June, coming in 3 weeks, to take a decision about post-war Gaza. If not, then we will see Gantz resigning from this government, something that Netanyahu, of course, doesn't want to see.
As you say, external pressure, internal pressure. Thank you, as always, for the update. Correspondent Balir Sladin, live from outside the Israeli parliament in Jerusalem. Now, 128 hostages remain in captivity, and as we were discussing earlier, still no clarity as to how many of them are alive. One of the hostages is David Cuneo from Kibbutz Nir Oz, his wife Sharon Aloni Cuneo, and their 3-year-old twins, Yuli and Emma, were freed from Hamas captivity in that first hostage truce deal back in November. The last time she saw David in captivity, he was frail and had been wounded in the leg. His last words to her were, "Fight for me, don't give up." So for more, we welcome Moran Aloni, brother-in-law of David Cuneo, who is still being held hostage inside Gaza. And Moran joins us from the city of Rehovot. Moran, thank you so much for speaking to us once again on I24 News. And the hostages, it's unbelievable to say this number out loud, in captivity for 227 days, and the call from the families of the hostages is getting louder each day. One cannot imagine what it's like for Sharon, because, of course, she knows exactly what captivity is actually like. So how is she doing? How are the girls? What can you share?
When people ask me how she's doing, I can only say that she's a shell of a person. She's without her partner. She's without the father of her daughters. And she, as you said, she knows exactly what's going on there. And I think that it's getting difficult more and more each day, especially when we hear more and more news of dead hostages that were found in Gaza. And we're hearing more and more speculations of the numbers of living hostages and dead hostages. And I think that it's, I cannot imagine other families. And I'm seeing my sister, she's waiting, she's on hold. She's trying to be there for her daughters. I think that given the circumstances, she's doing an amazing work, but it's tough. We're there for her every day, supporting her in everything that she needs from us. But it's not easy to keep hope alive, especially when seeing everything around us, the political wings, the way that people are, talking about hostage families now, saying or accusing them, in a political stand or taking a political stand. These are people that their families are there. They don't know if they're alive or dead, and it's heartbreaking for me to see what's going on.
And it's just so cruel to think that there are people like Sharon and others who don't even know if their partners are alive or not. There's been no update from Hamas. There's been clearly not enough pressure from Qatar, from the US, from elsewhere to at least just get that, the proof of life, to know who might be coming home.
They are doing cynical use in human life. It's not news for us, but given the time that passed, we're talking about day 227. Sharon told me that, I think it was Emma or maybe both, asked recently if Dad really wants to come back. Because when they got freed from there, they were sure that it's going to be a couple of days until David would come back. And they told them that he's going to stay there just to help others. And so Emma and Julie actually thought that maybe he want to stay there. He don't want to come home. And that's hearing your daughters asking you this about their father is, I can only imagine what Sharon felt at the moment. And so I cannot conceive of, of the fact that 227 days, people are still there, and we're dealing with, I'm sorry, nonsense here. The fact that these hostages are not the first thing that every person in our government think about them, about the first thing in the morning, then we failed.
The psychological manipulation, the releasing of videos, the mixed reporting about what is happening inside Gaza is just another layer to the evil that Hamas has been involved in since the 7th of October. It is just too difficult to even try and process. I'm wondering about the kind of support that you are getting from each other. I spoke to relatives of one of the hostages in recent days who said it's a big family of families of hostages, and he described it as the saddest family in the world. How are you helping each another, supporting one another, helping each other to get the strength to get through to another day?
I think that the fact that we stand together, I think that the fact that we're keeping our fight, making sure that this won't go away, because let's face it, if the families will not raise their voice and will not continue raising their voice every single day, nothing would happen. I wake up in the morning, I see people going to work, doing shoppings, playing with their kids, going on vacations. World moves on. And if we're not keeping this alive, no one will. I personally do not believe that the government has a strong interest to keep this topic alive. I think that they already understand that they did too little for too long in order for this to be considered as something. And I think that's the way that I see our support. I can't say that we are in, constant communication with other families. I'm sure that other families are. I see my older sister Danielle and the lecture that she's giving and the interviews that she's giving to the press. It's another try of keeping this alive and not allowing these people, and I won't say their memories, but these people fade away. I think that there not one family that lost hope that they'll see their loved ones again. And I think that's what we're doing.
And certainly that hope is inspiring so many people. One hopes that you do feel the support from the entire nation. We wait for good news about David and all the hostages being held in Gaza. Moran Aloni, thank you so much for speaking to us. We appreciate you being with us live from Rehovot. Thank you, Moran. Danny Ayalon, when you hear the heartbreak, when you hear the trauma, when you know that there were 3-year-old twins held captive for all this time, and yet, as we said at the start of this broadcast, the microscope is shining on the way Israel is prosecuting this retaliatory war.
It's a cynical, hypocritical international community which is unfortunately being duped by radical Islamists and by their accomplices. And this is part of the political war. And it's really heartbreaking that they do it with babies. We have to remember, where is the baby? There is a 1-year-old baby there. Yarden Bibas. Yes, exactly. And the fact that there is no constant demand and condemnation on a daily basis by the UN, by Mr. Guterres, who has been proven to be a real, I would say, person that is not fit for this job. Leaders for the entire world should have demanded on a daily basis, bring them back home, and also, if not, with bearing the consequences. And this is where I think that maybe the Biden administration was a little bit wrong by trying to tie Israel's hands vis-a-vis an operation in Rafah. Unfortunately, we see that with talks, nothing can happen, maybe only political pressure.
Which brings me to you, Yaakov Lapin, and that pending full-scale security operation inside Rafah. Controversial indeed. The pressure remains from the US. We'll be talking about that later on in this broadcast. But right now, at this juncture, what does an operation there mean for the hostages, the families of the hostages we just spoke to?
Well, I think that it's actually Israel's best shot at securing further releases. Right now, we have 1 million people, approximately, according to the latest reports, Gazans who have left the Rafah area. Probably another 400,000 will need to evacuate. By the way, that took only just a couple of weeks, and the U.S. administration was telling us that this would be impossible, ignoring the fact that Israel actually did this in Gaza City at the beginning of the ground maneuver. So we're seeing this operation expand. Defense Minister Gallant told Sullivan today, as he was visiting him at the Defense Ministry, that it's going to expand. So this is basically a fait accompli. Now, once that operation expands further, Israel is very close, I think, to taking Philadelphia corridor. It already controls the Rafah crossing. All of these things are massive pressure points on the Hamas leadership, which sees that despite all of the pressure that it's applying on Israel, including this lawfare through the ICC, Israel is not stopping its advances. It's tearing apart what's left of the Hamas terror army. Now, once the Hamas leadership finds itself surrounded 360 degrees overground, perhaps in the tunnels next to it, and perhaps if Israel, makes an offer saying, look, you can leave, go to Qatar, and let go of all of the hostages that you're holding, maybe that's an offer that they'll find worthy of consideration. We can only hope, but certainly at least Israel would be able to offer something rather than do what others have asked it to do, which is let go of all of its pressure points, and that would actually damn the hostages to a fate of being in Hamas's dungeons for who knows how long. So this is the best shot that Israel has, I think, at getting at least some of the hostages out, and we can only hope that rescue operations will also become realistic as things move forward.
Certainly, we can hope. Stay with us. Much more to unpack. Right now, though, we turn to relations between Washington and Jerusalem. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has held several high-profile meetings in Israel, sitting down with the Prime Minister, the President and others to discuss exactly what we're talking about, that security operation in Rafah and diplomatic connections with Saudi Arabia. Correspondent Robert Swift has more in this report.
Not for the first time, and likely not for the last, Jake Sullivan is visiting Israel amid the ongoing war in Gaza. The US's National Security Advisor brought with him news from his diplomatic stopover in Saudi Arabia. In meetings with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Sullivan stressed the possibility that Saudi Arabia is prepared to normalize ties with Israel if Jerusalem concedes to the formation of a Palestinian state. Something the White House knows Netanyahu's far-right coalition partners will almost certainly never accept.
We will not reward the terrible massacre of October 7th, which 80% of the Palestinians support. We will not allow them to establish a terrorist state from which they will be able to vigorously attack us.
Sullivan also met with Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, where he was briefed on Israeli efforts to displace hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from the southern Gazan city of Rafah as the IDF expands operations there. Concerns over civilian casualties in Rafah have brought the Jerusalem-Washington alliance to a new low point, with Sullivan also conducting meetings with War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz and leader of the opposition Yair Lapid. As Israel's longest war drags on, with no obvious end in sight, it's likely only a matter of time until the next high-level US visit to Jerusalem.
So for more, we now go live to senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim. He joins us from UN headquarters in New York. Good to see you, Mike. So the UN Security Council set to hold a meeting on this Rafah operation in just over an hour or so. Concern around Palestinian civilians sheltering there. And of course, this plan for the day after the war, or maybe a lack of plan. What is expected? What can you tell us?
Benita, Algeria and Slovenia, two Security Council members, called for this meeting this afternoon to discuss the situation in Rafah. According to a UN spokesman earlier today, he said that some 900,000 Gazans in the Rafah area have been displaced over the past couple of weeks. That's about 40% of the population, though it's not necessarily tied to the evacuation orders given by Israel. It is notable, though, the UN and, for that matter, the U.S. government have said in the past, even within the last few weeks, that any large-scale evacuation of Rafah would lead immediately to major humanitarian consequences. We just haven't seen that play out as of yet, though time will certainly tell what effect those large-scale evacuation orders will have. We expect to hear today in the UN Security Council from Tor Wennesland, the UN's point man on the Middle East peace process, though that seems to be a contradiction, a peace process in the Middle East. We'll also hear from a representative of the Office of the Coordinator for Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, within the United Nations at this briefing as well. Don't expect any Security Council action. It's more of an open briefing just to give the latest on the situation in Rafah. Keep in mind, the U.S. has said time and time again they oppose any large-scale operation in Rafah, but what we're seeing play out on the ground, some experts already say, amounts to just that, a large-scale operation, though it's certainly not been defined that way by the U.S., which seems to be the only voice that matters on this particular issue.
On top of all the latest developments, as always, thank you so much. Senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, live from New York. Thank you, Mike. Now we circle back to our top story from this hour. Of course, that dramatic move by the International Criminal Court prosecutor on this day, requesting these arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant and 3 Hamas leaders. Let's take a listen to the response from the Israeli Prime Minister.
The absurd and false order of the prosecutor in The Hague is not only directed against the Prime Minister of Israel and the Minister of Defense, it is directed against the entire state of Israel. It is directed against the IDF soldiers, who are fighting with supreme heroism against the vile Hamas murderers, who attacked us with terrible cruelty on October 7th. Prosecutor in The Hague, with what audacity do you dare compare the monsters of Hamas to the soldiers of the IDF, the most moral army in the world? With what audacity you compare between Hamas, which murdered, burned, butchered, raped, and kidnapped our brothers and sisters, and the IDF soldiers who are fighting a just war with an unmatched, unparalleled morality? As the Prime Minister of Israel, I reject with disgust the Hague prosecutor's comparison between democratic Israel and the mass murderers of Hamas. This is a complete distortion of reality. This is exactly what the new anti-Semitism looks like. It has moved from the campuses in the West to the court in The Hague. What a shame. Israeli citizens, I promise you one thing, the attempt to tie our hands will fail. 80 years ago, the Jewish people were defenseless against our enemies, but not anymore. I repeat what I said on the eve of Holocaust Day at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. As Prime Minister of Israel, I pledge that no pressure and no decision in any international forum will prevent us from striking those who seek to destroy us. We will overthrow the evil rule of Hamas and achieve complete victory. In front of the lies in The Hague I say, the glory of Israel does not lie.
Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran, a clear message there from the Israeli Prime Minister.
Indeed, and this, the days after October 7th, there was still some international support to Israel's just operation in the Gaza Strip, and look where that's gone in just a number of months. That I think, and I agree to what my colleagues here have said, it illustrates first and foremost diplomatic failure on the part of Israel already while the war is still going on. The diplomatic arena is hurting Israel more and more and more, and I think Israel's enemies are onto this, and they're trying to push it to that arena, the legal arena. You hear it, you see it in the Hamas statements and Hezbollah statements of trying to push the international community towards more pressure against Israel. This is something that also resonates in Israeli internal politics, the effects of how Israel is handling the war. But at the end of the day, this is a significant blow, first of all diplomatically, but also to the wind that pushes Israel and Israeli society as they try and support their leadership in this war.
Ambassador, your thoughts on the anti-Semitism that he describes, the Prime Minister describes, spreading from American campuses to The Hague?
Yeah, this anti-Semitism has been going on for a long time, and now there is an outburst for the last few months. I would say there are two special measures that Israel should take right now. First of all is to enlist the United States to put a huge pressure, not just on the ICC, but also on countries that will reject the prosecutor's request. And secondly, there may be an unintended consequence where internally the Israeli government and parties can get together because there is a unanimous rejection of this absurd, outrageous accusation. And that may be also something that will influence the government. Maybe Gantz now will postpone his intention to leave the government, because right now we should all get together. When Israel is united, when there is no opposition or coalition, it's very hard, even for the United States, to dissuade us from doing right things for us.
Your thoughts, Yaakov, on exactly that?
I think that it's critical that Israel continues to pursue its core security interests and not let anybody or anything stop it from doing that. At the end of the day, that will translate back, I believe, into diplomatic and regional assets for Israel. I don't think any of Israel's Middle Eastern allies, formal or informal, want to see a weak Israel. They actually would want to see Israel take away Islamist, Iranian-backed jihadist forces, whatever they may say in public. That's what they want, the Sunni moderate states. And I think that's actually the most important thing for Israel's security interest. And of course, as my colleagues here have rightly noted, the non-military battle arena is a major arena, and Israel is losing badly in that arena. It needs, I think, first of all, help from the United States, and there has to be a way to better put out Israel's message using sophisticated tools. There has to be thought invested in this. It's a strategic battlefield.
30 seconds left. Ambassador, what does that help from the United States actually look like realistically?
Mostly politically, because we know that the ICC has no any measure of enforcement. It's up to the member states who are party to this ICC. And let's say that Mr. Netanyahu wants to visit a certain state which is a party to the ICC. If there is a pre-arrangement and with the US saying that do not dare touch the prime minister, then it will really render this ICC into really an obsolete organization, and hopefully this will be the beginning of the demise of this kangaroo court.
We said that about UNRWA, and UNRWA is still alive and well. I fear the ICC is not going anywhere,